Hello there. Hope you enjoyed the previous session of Details by Mr. Jashish Kambli. I am Priyanshi and I will be your host for this session of Details. As the craft of design continues to evolve and require more strategic thinking, we need new tools to address today's greatest political, social, environmental, and cultural changes. We are delighted to have with us Mr. Phil Balagtas, founder of the Design Futures Initiative. Phil has been a visual and UX designer since 2001 and has experience designing across various platforms and domains. Phil is also an avid public speaker and presented and taught workshops around the world on various topics including design facilitation, design transformation, and speculative design, delivering powerful statements around the importance of design and strategy to shape the future of society and businesses. He shares an amalgamation of experience from working across sectors and focuses on how to empower designers for social impact. We are eagerly waiting for your keynote, so I'll swiftly hand over the stage to you.
Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well and safe. It's an honor to be here. Give me a second to share my screen. Oop, got a little bit of a preview. Great. So thank you. I'm the president founder of a nonprofit called the Design Futures Initiative. We're based in San Francisco, California. I'm also a design director at McKinsey & Company, but I'll be going off on my own doing some independent work after this May. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but an asteroid is 35 million miles away and approaching the Earth, and it could hit us within about 6 months. I'm just kidding. That's actually the proposition that the NASA created as an experiment. This is not real, an experiment for US and European space agencies over the last week. And it was a week-long exercise to test scenario building. Participants in this exercise had about 1 week to understand what the implications were for an asteroid hurling towards Earth. Typically, asteroids are sort of ignored. Sometimes we know about them, sometimes we don't. But throughout this exercise, each day they found out a little bit more information about the asteroid, and were asked to basically figure out what we would need to do to respond to a hypothetical situation. And we found out that if we were confronted with 2021 PDC, which is the name of the asteroid, we would not be able to launch any spacecraft or use any of Earth's technologies to avert it. Kind of a grim proposition, but the experts fell short. And given the 6 month time frame, we would not be prepared. So this is really the amount of impact that the asteroid would have had on the Earth. Most of Eastern Europe would be impacted, and there'd probably be many lives lost. But this is, we can think of a lot of asteroids in our life and our businesses that we need to prepare for. And the point of showing you this, and the point of NASA's experiment, was really to understand how do we think about the future and think about cataclysmic events that could affect all of us on the planet, all of us citizens. The truth is, any space rock that is hurtling within 125 million miles of the sun is considered a NEO object. There are very, very few cases where we've actually been able to where we've had this type of event. In 2019, a 427-foot wide city killer asteroid flew within about 45,000 miles of Earth with almost no warning. So it is possible for something to get very, very close, but we have a lot of technology out in space right now to be able to identify these threats. NASA is looking at a number of different options for what we would do, including sending a spacecraft to knock it off of its trajectory. We're looking into lasers and a lot of other impact-oriented solutions for that. But this is, I think one thing we've learned in the pandemic are we are not always prepared for everything. There are some systemic-wide failures that we need to be prepared for in the future. And that's why I'd like to present to you guys what we're calling futures thinking. But specifically futures design thinking. And I've gotten a little bit of criticism around using the word design thinking, because design thinking has been around for about 20 years or so. And, as designers do, we like to sort of criticize and redesign everything. But I'm using this because we are designers here, and I'm a designer. I've been designing for over 20 years, half of my career, pretty much, half of my life. And I think it's very important to use these kind of methodologies to understand how we as designers can participate in these conversations and strategic conversations, so that we can, come up with solutions for the future. I'm going to talk to you about three different types of tools in futures thinking: strategic foresight, speculative design, and design thinking, which we all know and well. I won't go too deep into the methodologies, but I'll show you a couple of methods that we use for understanding what does the future look like. One of the first ways that we actually do it is we kind of look at the possibilities. Just like that asteroid, where the possibility of the asteroid coming, that's a very inconvenient challenge to many of us on the planet. But how do we understand what are the implications of that? What does the world look like at that time? And how do we choose a responsible path into that future, so that we're prepared for both risks and prepare for the opportunities that might lie ahead? We do this by analyzing the trends. We look around the world today, we look at what happened in the past, and we understand our history. And then from there, we are able to create scenarios. What's the scenario that we might be facing, and then create prototypes. Here's the design. The design comes into this part. How do we prototype what the future looks like, really experience it through a vision, and understand how are we going to behave if this type of future comes around? And I'll show you a number of different projects, because I think speculative design and futures thinking is best told through examples. And then we can use these prototypes, these experiences, to understand what are the policies that are important to be there for these products or services to emerge. Should we build this thing just because we can, or should we not? I've spoken quite a bit on this topic for many years, so I apologize if any of you have seen any of my talks online, and I'm showing some of the same examples, but I've got some new examples today as well. But one of the first things that I try to do is kind of set up the perspective of, like, what does this process look like? Like I said, just like any design thinking, we're looking at trends and research. We're talking to experts. We're trying to understand, what do the experts think is going to happen in the next 5, 10, 20 years? And then from there, we do something called world building. And world building really comes from science fiction, right? If you've ever read a science fiction book, there's sort of they're building the world around you. You meet the characters, and then there's some sort of drama or climax, and then it gets resolved at the end. But to understand and really immerse yourself in that world, they're giving you all the facts, all the data. And we can do that today with futures thinking. And we do that by creating scenarios. Once we understand and we can stand in that world 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and we can look around, then we can understand what are the problems we want to solve there through design. And we come up with speculative projects, speculative prototypes, so that we can understand that. And then there's the strategy part. Now that we understand the future, how do we build strategies towards that future, or away from the futures that we don't want? But typically we start with something like this. It's called the Voros cone. This particular diagram was created by my friend Elliot Montgomery. He's a professor over at Parsons. He's also part of a group called the Extrapolation Factory. And you'll see many different versions of the futures cone or the Voros cone, but this is one. I like this one. It's very colorful. So we all know, and we teach kids this also, that the future is not just one future. Though it might seem to arrive as one future, there are many possibilities, right? The asteroid could still hit. And so, if we look straight down the middle, there's the probable future. Things that we think will happen for sure. I will for sure at some point leave my hotel room. I will for sure one day die. But many things can happen on the way. The next 2 hours or so. I could meet a friend, or I could get hit by a car, or I could, find some money. There's lots of different types of possibilities that could happen in the future. And we understand this so that we can prepare for those different possibilities. Now, there's so many that we can prepare for, but we try to be strategic about which ones we want and which ones we don't want. So I'll show you a few different projects here from around the world, but I really like to start with this one. This is by Aggie Haynes. She is she's a PhD now, but she graduated from the Royal College of Art in London under Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby's Designing Interactions program. This is a very famous program due to the work that came out under the speculative and critical design umbrella. She's very interested in manipulating the body. If we could actually change the body? What might we do with it? And so this is a designer baby. It's not a real child, but you can see there are some additional folds in the skin. And those folds are so that this child can work longer hours in hotter climates. So in a future that's very challenged with climate change, if we could design our children to work longer hours, would we do it? And so again, this is just a provocation, because a lot of this design, speculative design, asks what if this happened? This is a project called Human Hyena by Paul Gong. So it was inspired by hyenas. Hyenas have a very strong and resilient digestive system. They can eat pretty much anything. And so these devices, these three devices that you see, change the biology of humans, creating new bacteria to allow them to modify their digestive system so that they can actually digest different types of foods. So as we move into overpopulation and we're sort of challenged with food resources, what are the type of things that humans might do to try to, still extract nutrients from different types of foods? Again, these are just prototypes. These are literally just crafted, probably 3D printed, but it's a provocation and a proposition for what we might need to do. Julian Tauvel created a group called Impudence, and these are three types of makeups. On the left is Public Veil, a silver-based cream protecting yourself from thermal cameras, a nanoparticle makeup programmable via your smartphone, and a gene editing care based on celebrities' influencer data, DNA. Now, if you go to the impudence.fr website, you might see that you can actually purchase these, but they won't be available for the next 20 years, I think, or 10 years. So again, the vehicle from which you immerse people into the provocations to ask these questions is very important. When I first saw this, I really believed this was something I could buy until I looked at the fine print and said not available till 2030. Last year in April 2020, Joe Doucette, who is a fashion designer, created these face shields. Now these are just 3D renderings. And we all know we can't just get on an airplane with just a face shield. You have to use a face shield and a mask. But this was speculative at the time. And as all of the public health warnings were coming up around like what you need to do to protect yourself, Joe Doucette asked, how could we protect ourselves but also look fashionable at the same time? This is the newest version, April 2021. You can actually buy this face shield. You probably can't get on an airplane with it because you still need the mask, but it looks great, doesn't it? So speculative design can push into the 1 year ahead. A lot of the traps and myths about speculative design is that it can only happen between, in the far future, 5-10 years down the road. But what we've been discovering is that you don't really need to do that. You can speculate about the immediate tomorrow and prototype the immediate tomorrow so that you can understand what it might be. Some might say that's just design. You're just doing design. Sure, we can call it whatever we want, but the idea is to understand implications. Iwa Nuak and her facial recognition averting jewelry. This is a project that I still keep in my talks. It's by the UK government, and this is one of the first times that they were actually seeking speculative design as a prototyping vehicle. They want to understand the future of aging in about 30 years. So they ran 3 workshops around the UK in different cities and presenting them with different types of scenarios of what the future might look like. They showed them pictures, they ran through exercises. What you see on the top is those 2 pictures might look very similar, but if you look very, very closely, there's a Facebook carport, a Google carport, there are autonomous buses. The signage across the canal is a wayfinding signage, just with a name on it, and the other one is an advertisement. And they asked questions to some of the participants. How would you feel about privately run services such as a Facebook carport? Would you trust the Facebook bus over the public services bus? And all of this led to a giant map of understanding of what we might believe we need in the next 30 years as citizens. And this is sort of the map of well-being broken down by culture, community, employment, housing, better living. And this allowed them to actually design the next public services over the next few decades. Now, a lot of things can change. Our perspective on our lives could change, our interests and our desires can change as well. But this gives them a better starting point. And of course, it will evolve and evolve as time goes on and as history changes, because again, many different things can influence us as the future unfolds. So you see, speculative design, futures thinking doesn't necessarily have to be something that is in service today. And I think that's again the great myth that we've been fighting for such a long time. We can all be futures thinkers. So it doesn't necessarily need to be in operation, but it can set a new agenda. It can open up new possibilities, new ideas, new consequences that we have to address, and set a new agenda. And this is part of our challenge today, is changing the present so that tomorrow is the tomorrow that we want. Back in 2015, here's another government project. The Dubai, a group in Dubai used to run an annual conference called the Future Government Services, the Future of Government Services, and they'd run an exhibition. And Tellart was an agency that was asked to help create this exhibition. So this is the entrance to the exhibition of that year, and you would walk down the street and you'd see like robots and drones and construction robots. Today, that's not a very odd thing, but 6 years ago, gosh, only 6 years ago, a construction drone or a robotic dog felt pretty profound. But there's a couple of intentions around this exhibit. One was to show the future and show emerging technology, but also to prototype it with citizens and understand and ask these questions of, if this technology existed, what would you want to know? Is this something you want or don't want? This is the autonomous car prototyping lab. So if you didn't actually have to drive a car because it's autonomous, what would you want to do in the car? On the right here, you can see sort of a workout bike, where you could ride your bike and work out in the car. There's a conference call car, a dining car, and testing different ideas of what kind of autonomous vehicles you might want to do. And what could happen? What are all the negative implications of that as well? This is the entrance to one of their living laboratories. This is a city kit self-building building. So this building roams the land. It can actually fix roadways and build new infrastructure, new roads, new buildings, using the sand and materials all around it. And it's solar powered as well. Today, this exhibition turned into not just an annual exhibition, but it's a permanent exhibition, a permanent museum in Dubai called the Museum of the Future. It's a very beautiful building. You can't miss it. Look it up. It's very organic looking. And there's now, instead of just an annual commission, it's a permanent commission that's always looking at the future. When I first saw this project, I asked the strategy director, what was the impact on the citizens, and I used the word design fiction, and he really didn't like the word fiction because fiction feels like it's not real. And he said, these prototypes are based on not on fictitious realities, but real provable drivers and trends that are moved down the road in predictable ways. Of course, no one knows what's going to happen in the future, but this process hinges on plausible futures and very rigorous research. So while this might feel like science fiction or just a creative exercise, academic exercise, this is really based on research. A lot of these people have worked with scientists and with researchers to understand what are the actual components that could actually make these kind of things come to pass. Speculative design has been practiced for a very, very long time, though it might not have been called speculative design. Just like design thinking might not have been called design thinking back in the 80s. It was just research. And Apple in 1987, this was before Steve Jobs. John Sculley was the CEO at the time, had to do a talk at a conference. And he asked his design and marketing team, show me what the future looks like. I'd love to have a great presentation. And they created this video, what they call a vision video, called the Apple Knowledge Navigator. I'll try to play this. My bandwidth might be a little bit slow, but I'll try and play this for you guys.
You have 3 messages. Your graduate research team in Guatemala, just checking in. Robert Jordan, a second semester junior, requesting a second extension on his term paper. And your mother reminding you about your father's surprise birthday party next Sunday. Today you have a faculty lunch at 12 o'clock. You need to take Kathy to the airport by 2. You have a lecture at 4:15 on deforestation.
So I'll stop there. You can find this online. It's about 7 minutes long, but the person who designed it, Hugh Dubberly, was very interested in the future of education and what emerging technologies would look like. So back then, a lot of the designers in the labs, and Hugh had come from Atari Labs at the time, were really tapped into. They didn't have the internet. And that's actually the one thing that, if you see in that video, didn't exist. There's a lot of things that didn't exist. There's a foldable screen. There's a webcam, there's a virtual assistant. All of these technologies, pre-internet, were sort of being talked about with people at MIT and a lot of other universities. And this is what they came up with. Now, we don't know, and this might seem very familiar with the touchscreen interface, we don't know if this was actually on the board, on the research and development board that eventually became the iPad. But we all do know that some of these ideas continued to perpetuate throughout Apple and inspire people to build towards the Palm and what eventually became Siri and the iPad. Speculative design, we don't necessarily own that, but speculation in general is a very powerful tool. In 2018, NASA ran a competition for creating a 3D printed habitat on Mars. And one of the winners was Team Zophorus, and this is one of their projects. So architecture has been using speculative techniques again in academia and for actual practice for many years, way before designers even got there. This is the capsule that actually lands and actually uses the Martian soil to 3D print the habitat inside of it. This is the inside of the habitat. So I'm going to take a little bit of a departure and talk about some work we did at McKinsey. So I joined McKinsey about 3.5 years ago, and they're a business strategy consultant. And I wanted to bring futures practice in there as well. And I have a lot to say about how do you bring this into your organization. So we can address this in the QA if you'd like. But I'm working on a book around this topic as well, collecting stories. But one of the ways to do it is to really kind of start cheap, free, and easy is what I usually say. If you want to bring any sort of new idea or new thinking into any organization, try the cheapest, freest, easiest way possible. And we did this by creating a newsletter, an internal newsletter that we called Signals in Design. We are about to launch our 3rd issue of it. You'll be able to find the McKinsey blog in the next month or so. But this was the 2nd issue where we looked at certain trends. And the benefit of doing something internal that's free and easy is, you don't have to get it approved by marketing for external publication, but you can kind of start to build your community inside, get other designers who are really interested in this and allow them to help you collaborate and build this practice or build these artifacts to kind of, send around throughout the organization and get people interested in the idea of futures thinking. So of course, McKinsey being a very data-driven company, we looked at a couple of different data points and signals. The trends we were looking at were things like digital identity, data interoperability, which is actually the sharing of medical records. Right now, there's a lot of, at least in the United States, a lot of barriers between sharing personal and medical records. But what if those barriers were not there? Advanced artificial intelligence, advanced recognition devices being other types of biometrics, other kinds of sensors that you could put inside your body to sense things, and the advent and advancement of biome and gene therapy. We learned a lot from the Human Genome Project, so we understand genetics quite a bit, but we're just starting to tap the surface of what's going on in our gut biome and its connection to the nervous system and the brain. So give it a couple of decades or so, and we'll really understand what that relationship environment is like. And if we could, what could we actually do with that? So here's some data points that just kind of show you what's the level of investment in each of these different types of sectors. And now we've built the world. Here are the patterns that we have chosen to create the world and now speculate around. So we created an ecosystem. And again, this is just an illustration, but in different areas. So in the top left, 01, different types of input recognition devices. There's the toilet that could actually collect data from your feces. There's an internal data collection pill that you would swallow. There are actually sensors that you could have embedded like in your heart and your organs that could just continue to push out data, and you can read through a Bluetooth device, Siri. There's a laundromat there, so even just taking your clothes and kind of extracting cells from your clothes at the laundromat. That's another place you could start to take that data. And so if you take all that data about what you know about a human being and put it through an advanced, fast AI system and start to use predictive technology, digital twin, and all of that stuff, what sort of products could you build, and what are the services, and what could you learn about that? Could you learn about tracking new diseases? Could you learn about tracking all sorts of information about populations? And then we came up with a couple of interesting products as well. This is one of them, called the Omnibiotic Restaurant. Omni being many biomes, so understanding the many biomes within the body and being able to go to a restaurant, put this device in your mouth that could measure all of that at once, send that data back to the kitchen, and then the kitchen would actually create food or a menu selection based on your particular signature, your chemical signature. We had another project which we started in May during COVID, trying to understand what the next patient experience would be beyond the COVID crisis. So again, this is a very practical application. Now that we're sort of testing the waters internally of like what kind of provocations can we build, how do we really start to apply this to business so that our clients would understand. And so we did both a near and a far future, because at this time around May of 2020, a lot of healthcare clinics were trying to understand, how do we reopen? How do we get out of COVID and sustain our business? And then how do we sustain into the next 2-5 years based on what's going on? So with the information, with the trends that we were discovering at the time, now remember in May of 2020, lots of COVID, lots of COVID information. We were learning a ton about healthcare. We created 4 different scenarios, and this is very typical in strategic foresight. There's usually the top right scenario, which is transformation and growth. Everything's going well. Cases are declining. The treatments are available. It's like, we're coming out of it. It's utopia. The opposite, the bottom left quadrant, is what we call the collapse scenario, where everything is collapsing, continuing to collapse. Cases increasing, no treatment, everything is just going poorly. And then you have the 2 scenarios, caution and recovery, which are sort of the intermediate, which have a little bit of both. And you can use these scenarios to actually start to understand what are the different, possibilities that we might want to prepare for, if it goes this way or if it goes that way. I looked at this recently and realized this is what we're in now. There's some areas where cases are increasing, but treatment is available, but we are still struggling to distribute this and get it to the rest of the world. And I read through this and I was like, wow, this is really, really accurate. We came up with this. I mean, we didn't just come up with it. I mean, we used a lot of data to get there and a lot of really understanding, but we were actually pretty accurate to what's going on today. Now, this project we didn't come up with the Omnibiotic Restaurant, but the intent was that we would do this project and then we would bring it to our healthcare clients and we would say, here's our futures process. This is how we do it. We're thinking about it, work with us so that we could build your products of the future, your services of the future, allow us to help you reopen. So we did, again, 6 to 18 months was the near future, and then 2 to 5 years is the far future. We looked at telehealth. These are all obvious at the time. Telehealth, home delivery and services, at clinic care, alternative access points. So if for people who don't want to go and be in a hospital, are there like mobile satellite hospitals? And then in the next 2 to 5 years, what's the advancement of that? So autonomous care and treatment, a global contact tracing network. And again, some of these are also obvious like projections, but you have to be sort of realistic. When you think about a healthcare system or any sort of distribution system, it can take a few years, especially with the high level of policy and regulations that are needed for healthcare devices and services. It could take 5 years just for a satellite building to be built and actually working and thinking about what you would actually do there. So I'll show you a couple of methodologies here, again, within the 3 ideas: strategic foresight, speculative design, and design thinking and strategic planning. Again, this is another fancy diagram where we were trying to understand at McKinsey what this process would look like. And you'll see at the top it says research, concept, and strategy, very similar to design thinking. We do the exact same thing. We're just thinking about it in the future. And we do user interviews and expert interviews, but the only difference is the world building part. The world that we're building is not just the immediate tomorrow. We're looking out 5-10 years sometimes and or beyond, and using a lot of trends and data and research to understand what that world would look like, because we can't experience it immediately. STEEP is a very common framework. I don't know if you call it a framework, but it stands for social, technological, economic, environmental, and political. If you're looking at today or tomorrow, if you can understand these 5 dimensions, and there's other variations of this. Sometimes people use values, STEEP V. Sometimes it's called PESTLE, lots of different kinds. But they give you different ways of slicing the world so that you can understand what's going on. So what's the technological landscape look like? What sort of emerging technologies do we have available? What's the environmental landscape? And environment could be like nature, the environment, but it can also mean your internal environment. So like what's the office environment look like? What's the kitchen environment look like? We were working with a household cleaner product once, and the environment was actually the kitchen. What does the kitchen home look like? What does the family life look like in the kitchen, for us to understand what that future would look like? And that's part of the world building aspect too. A very malleable, so if there's any method that you all take away from this talk, go look up the futures wheel, or also called the implications wheel. And this is a very easy one because you can use it at any time. You don't have to be doing a futures project. You could use this today in your design thinking pieces. And how it works is in the center, you put anything, a trend, an event, a signal, the existence of something, the existence of autonomous cars can be in the center. And the first ring on the outside is your direct implication, your first order consequence. What's the direct impact? So if I have an autonomous car, the direct impact is I don't have to drive. And then the next circle out is the indirect implication, the second order consequence. Well, if I don't have to drive, might I forget how to drive if there's an accident? That's the indirect implication. And you can keep going further and further out from the center, and you start to uncover all these blind spots, all these things you might not ever have thought about, both positive and negative. And you can use all of these different consequences to understand how are we going to prepare for this if this happens. Now, of course, each of these consequences have different degrees of severity and probability, and you can use many different methods to prioritize which ones you care about or don't care about. But if you can find, from an opportunistic perspective, a consequence that no one's thinking about, you can pioneer a solution in that area and be ahead of the game, or pioneer some sort of protection in that area, some sort of regulation in that area to protect us from this thing from ever happening. Backcasting is also a very traditional method. Typically, it's just you look forward in time. You see what you want in the future, and you backcast into the present to understand what are the milestones and implications and infrastructures that are necessary for that future to be true. So if I were to build an autonomous car in the future, I'd need to learn about AI, I'd need to learn about automobile manufacturing, a lot of different things. And if I wanted that future, I would go and do those certain things. But here you can see I've sort of mapped backcasting on top of a futures cone. There are many future possibilities. They're positive and negative, and maybe I want 3 different futures, and you can just backcast into the present and figure out, like, how could I get to that future? What are the things that could happen towards the negative future or the positive future, and how will I create those protections or opportunities so that one of those arrives or not? And it can be messy, as you can see with the blue lines. You can jump from one milestone to the next. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about the Design Futures Initiative. Again, I was fascinated with speculative and critical design in grad school. I saw a lot of opportunity in this method and approach, and thought we should really be doing this strategically at a business level. We can really use this type of thinking. And I started a meetup, a club, back in 2015 in San Francisco called Speculative Futures. At the time, it was called Critical Design and Speculative Futures, but I shortened it. And my intent was really just to talk about this work, show everything that I showed you today. And that grew. And then we eventually started a conference called Primer, we're priming people for the future. And then that grew. And then we officially formed a nonprofit called the Design Futures Initiative. And so these are the three things that DFI does. We have over 60 chapters now. Just to show you the amount of growth, in 2018, that was only 3 years ago, we had 6 chapters. Today, we're at 60, and we get a new chapter request almost every other week. I think we only have 1 chapter in India. So if anyone is interested in starting a chapter, we would love to be in the Global South. We are really trying to push hard to get into Africa and other parts of Eastern Europe and Asia as well. But you can find details on our website. Among the different type of programs that we have, different things we're doing, we partnered with the United Nations Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs and ran a competition last year called Futuring Peace. So what's the future of peacemaking, peace building? The difference between those words sometimes, peace building, you have to understand it's not necessarily about having more war and more weapons and more military to sustain peace. It's like, how do we keep conflict from happening, and how do we sustain peace post-conflict as well? So we had a number of different submissions. This one's called the Citizen Peacemaker. So what does the future activist look like? And you can see some modern tech like drones, a Faraday pocket to put your cell phone in so that you can protect it from hackers, a POV camera. The racket umbrella is actually a reference to pro-democracy. So this is sort of a metaphorical piece as well. An umbrella, we saw a lot of people using umbrellas in China during the protests to avert from the lasers and cameras and other sorts of things. This one is called Natural Intelligence. So what if there was a network where you can actually speak to nature? Again, speculative, and it is very speculative, and this is just an illustration. But in the peace building process, what if we could actually talk and understand what our environment and nature was doing, and how do we actually include nature as a part of the peace building process? Because we don't necessarily always think about the environment. In the end, we had about 100 submissions, and we chose 5 winners and five noteworthy from across the world, all with really unique submissions. And at least 1 or 2 of those is actually going into production. There's a set of cards that was created for the peace building conversations, which allows you to kind of provoke different conversations. That's going to become an actual toolkit now, and they're producing that. We're going to be working with them again this year. Not sure yet what we're doing, but we're trying to establish an ongoing relationship with the United Nations and UNESCO. The future of peace is just such a great initiative, such a great effort. If we as designers can contribute to peacemaking, I mean, it's like the wish that when the genie asks you what 3 wishes, like world peace. Like if we could use this process to actually achieve world peace, gosh, I mean, why not, right? We work with kids. This is a project we started a couple of years ago at the Boys and Girls Club of San Francisco. So the Boys and Girls Club is a nonprofit in the United States that caters to youth. It gives at-risk youth a place to go to learn and for recreation. These are kids who are growing up in challenging neighborhoods surrounded by drugs and violence. And we ran several workshops with them, trying to teach them futures thinking. So what if we could use futures for hope and teach these kids that they don't have to grow up in a gang, they don't have to sell drugs, and they can actually think strategically about their future. They can understand the risks and challenges ahead, both with family and with social pressures, and strategically look at what's the history and how do I design my path, my life path into a better world. Now, ethics can be a very advanced or adult topic, but this is our ethics committee, and the 3 kids in the front are the committee, and the rest of the class is society. And we talked about things like war and artificial intelligence and facial recognition software and racism, and we had them debate. And these were middle school kids between ages of 10 to 13, and they're so amazing, and they're so smart. And we keep every time we design these workshops, I was like, well, I don't know if they're gonna understand what we're talking about, but they are, we really underestimated what they could do in these classes. we are now turning this youth program into a program for disabled youth in hospitals, working with sickle cell anemia kids. So we're building a VR game for these children who spend a lot of time in the hospital, extended care, and a lot of pain to escape and actually think about. I can't tell you too much about the game just yet, but basically it's a VR game with a what's it called, a headset where they can actually collaborate with other kids in other hospitals. So this is a great slide. Everyone likes to take a picture of the slide. If you're interested in any of this work, here are a few books to start with. Scott Smith and Madeline Ashby just released How to Future. That's a really great book. Some of that more conceptual critical design, speculative and critical design work. Speculative Everything is really good. I mentioned Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby earlier in the talk. And Future Scouting, this one on the top right by Damien Lutt, is a very accessible book for doing speculative work. It's a really easy read and a lot of really great examples and exercises. And then there's a ton of foresight and futures thinking books out there. Check out Future Shock. There's Future Shock. There's a lot of different reading out there. Primer, the conference I mentioned earlier, will be happening this year. Last year during the pandemic, we had to pivot from an in-person conference to a virtual conference. That was very successful. We had over 200% of attendees. We doubled our attendance basically by doing it virtual. So we do know now from now on, we're going to be doing a virtual component. Primer 21 will be happening in July. So if anyone is interested in this practice and wants to submit a talk or workshop, we've changed the model. Now all of our regional chapters are going to be managing it, and it's going to be 48 hours long, and each region will be managing a different part of the program. So you'll be able to represent your region. The DFI also just released their first 2-day speculative design workshop program. This is a training program. We've got 2 or 3 more running this year, but it's a really great workshop. It's 8 hours long for 2 days, and we walk you through the history of speculative design. We showed how to create prototypes, create immersive experiences, and there's a little bit on how do you bring this into your workplace. So, and lastly, I have a podcast called Zootopia. This isn't necessarily a futures podcast, but I invite lots of futurists on. We ask them all to bring articles of topics that they're interested in from the internet, and we just talk about them for about 45 minutes. Some of it is speculative about the future, some of it's just current trends and current topics, and sometimes we have a lot of fun and we act silly, and sometimes we get very deep and artistic and philosophical, and it's really great. We're going to be closing up season 3, I think, in May. I think that's it. And, I'd like to leave you all with this phrase. In 2019, the theme for our 2019 conference was Futures for All. And this is a very bold statement, and it has a lot of responsibility attached to it. This is our destination, our journey, and I hope that all of you would also think about Futures for All. It's not just about diversity and inclusion. It's about thinking about everything, thinking about our environment, thinking about the disabled, thinking about the youth, and how do we actually help everyone think about a future, a more prosperous, healthy, beautiful future for every being, every organism on the planet. This is one method you can use. You can look into futures thinking, but I implore all of you that we are all in this together, and I hope we can walk this road together and really make a much brighter, peaceful planet for us. Thank you.